Hello, everybody. It's Dino Talk Sports, and yet again, I have another mock draft for you. Except this time, I'm not doing it by myself. This time, I have a guest. If you're on Sports TikTok, Sports Twitter, YouTube, you know who Elite Takes is, aka Nico. Nico, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited to get into this mock draft now that all of free agency has gone down. We really seem to have a good idea of what these teams are going to be looking to do in the draft. The offseason is basically halfway through in terms of teams making their moves.
Yes, exactly. And that is a big turning point for mock drafts is when free agency happens because teams go ahead and attack their needs and suddenly it's not a need anymore. It's not something they need to draft. The Titans, for example, they wouldn't draft a tackle with the first overall pick, but let's say left tackle was their need. We were mocking it to them for the start of the offseason. They wouldn't do that anymore after overpaying for Dan Moore, right? But
Yep.
regardless, we're going to get into this immediately. There will be no trades. How it's going to work is he's going to get the odds, I'm going to get the evens, meaning you, Nico, start with the first overall pick. The Tennessee Titans are on the clock. Where do you think these people are heading?
All right. Well, I think free agency was kind of a tell on the Titans' part, and I think they are actually going to gear up to take a quarterback, despite all the rumors of New York trying to trade up with them and them trying to just emphasize taking the best talent in the draft. And a lot of people thought that was Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter, but I think it seems like they're going with a quarterback because they didn't entertain any of the veteran options in free agency, from Justin Fields to Sam Darnold to Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers and all of that. And instead, they really spent on the offensive line, just trying to get competent starters at every position with and Moore and Kevin Zeitler. And now that group is kind of filled out. And I think after doing that, you feel like if you were to bring a rookie quarterback in, they're going to have time in the pocket and you're going to be able to build an environment for them to be successful. And for me, I think if the Titans are going quarterback here, it's probably going to be Cam Ward, because I think if you're trying to replicate somewhat similar of a situation to what he had in Miami with all of that pass protection, when you bring in all these competent starters, it's going to create this environment for Cam Ward where he can have the time to make those longer plays down the field, be creative in the pocket. And I think the Titans have just built this situation for Cam Ward to come in and maybe be able to make a bit of a splash early on with him. So I think they're going Cam Ward.
I don't disagree. Every move, as you said, every move they've made during free agency points to them making this pick. And it's interesting because the Titans said early on in the offseason that they will not pass up on a generational player. And for most people, the two people who would even come close to falling under that term are Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter. It is a bit interesting that if they do select Ward, maybe they view him as such. I'm not quite that high on
That
him,
is true.
but if you at the end of the day, my rule is if you truly think a quarterback is your guy of the future, then you pick him regardless. So, and if the Titans think that about
Yes.
Ward, then you do it. But then we move to the Browns with the second overall pick, and there's a lot of speculation about are they going quarterback or not. From everything I've read and everything I understand, it seems like they're doing everything in their power to stay away from drafting a rookie quarterback if it's not Cam Ward, because that drop off from Ward to Shador is, in my opinion, a pretty steep drop off. So now it's just they're going to take the best player available. And if they had traded Myles Garrett, I would say they're going to pick Abdul Carter. But since they held on to him, gave him that massive contract, which is deserved, I think they're going to take the top player on their board, that being Travis Hunter. And from what I understand at the combine, they view Travis Hunter more as a primary receiver rather than a defensive back, which is where I view him as well. So I'm excited to see him in this offense. I feel like Kevin Stefanski is going to put him in great situations where the ball can get into his hands, he can make plays after the catch, etc. It's just a matter of who's going to be throwing him the ball. That's what we have to find out.
Absolutely. And I think if the Browns pass on the quarterback, I think the Giants, even though I don't think this is an amazing scenario, they're probably going to be sighing a bit of relief because they have really cornered themselves in this cornerback market. quarterback market by not being able to trade for Matthew Stafford. And now it seems like the Steelers want Aaron Rodgers, and maybe they'll go and sign Russell Wilson, but that's not the long-term plan that's going to save Brian Dable and Joe Shane's jobs. I think they're going to be looking to draft a quarterback, and I think that they're not going to play any games trying to get some guy in the second round and be a little more sneaky and play the value. I think they're just going to go ahead and take Shador Sanders at number 3 overall, and try to, I guess, convince John Mara that they've got the plan and they've got their guy for the future. Even though I probably disagree, I think the Giants will probably have given themselves no choice at that point, and they have to take Shador.
And that's something we want to emphasize as well. The Giants are kind of forced to make this pick, meaning this is kind of the worst case scenario from this offseason if you're a Giants fan. I mean, the worst would be not having a quarterback. That would be the worst. But
Yes.
they want Cam Ward. They could have gone after Sam. They could have gone after multiple shit. I'm sure they would have loved Geno Smith if they knew he was available, you know? So this is kind of worst case scenario if you're a Giants fan, but that doesn't mean there's no chance Shador doesn't pan out. It's New York City. He is trained to handle the media there. He has the confidence to handle the media there. I do think there is a world where him and Dable mesh really well and he performs well in this offense. He just has some things for himself to work on. But moving on from the Giants, going over to the Patriots, I'm all aboard the surround Drake May with offensive pieces. I mean, you have to surround your quarterback, your young quarterback, I might add, with offensive pieces. However, Abdul Carter is maybe the best player in this draft, and I know he's injured, but I can't imagine that Vrabel sees Abdul Carter and he passes up on him. He is just a freak of nature. His first year ever playing full-time edge rusher, he was in debate for the best edge rusher in the country. I think he was. And but he's also a bit of a project. I don't know if he can play all 3 downs at the NFL level yet because he's not a stellar run defender, but considering who's on the line of scrimmage for the Patriots, Carter doesn't need to be that. He can be their third down specialist, pass rush specialist, and he is going to generate a lot of pressure for a scary Patriots defensive line that now has Milton Williams, Christian Barmore, Keon White, who's developing. I would love that fit with the Patriots for Abdul Carter.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's kind of the effect of these quarterbacks going so early is that some of these really high level prospects are going to fall to teams that maybe hadn't been expecting to draft them. And I think that could sort of continue at number 5 with the Jacksonville Jaguars. And, their new general manager, James Gladstone, if we look at his main accomplishment in LA, it was building up that young defensive line with Braden Fisk and Jared Verse and Byron Young and all of those guys. I think that, well, you hire Liam Cohen as head coach and you're looking to get the most out of Trevor Lawrence, I think that they probably would not pass on the opportunity to draft a guy like Mason Graham and form this 3-headed monster with him, Trayvon Walker, and Josh Allen up front. I think that lines up perfectly with what Gladstone did in Los Angeles, despite all that they did to help Matthew Stafford as well.
Exactly. Yeah. The fact that they get Graham here at 5, who is widely known as the best defensive tackle in this draft. Again, you get to place him next to those 2 excellent edge rushers and Josh Allen, Trayvon Walker. There's a world where this Rams defensive line, which was pretty subpar for the most part last year outside of those 2 edge rushers, really takes a leap with a player like Graham there. But moving on to the Raiders, everybody and their mom is saying they're going to draft Ashton Jeanty, and I'm not putting that out of the question. But I think you just brought in Geno Smith. You just cut Andre James, meaning Jackson Powers Johnson is moving from guard to center. You still need a guard. We know Pete Carroll loves running the ball. Why not improve on that offensive line? And we want to keep Geno from getting PTSD from his time in Seattle. We want to put a competent interior offensive line in front of him. And when I think of a player worth that pick, I think Will Campbell slots in perfectly at guard for them, makes this run game better, makes this pass protection better for their new quarterback. It just seems like a Pete Carroll pick to focus on that offensive line and maybe we'll definitely get a running back later in this just loaded running back draft.
Absolutely. Just yet another awesome prospect just scooped up by a new regime. And I think that we could continue that at number 7 with the New York Jets. I just continue to feel like this pick makes a ton of sense because, when you think about Aaron Glenn and that attitude that they bring over from the Lions, it's just all about having these physical tone setters. And I think that Tyler Warren can be the definition of that for them, just being a very versatile tight end, a guy who could really help the Jets build up both their run game and their passing game, can really help support Justin Fields as a safety blanket and, help them in the run game. And I think that just, being able to scoop a guy like that at number 7, it's not something that the Jets are going to regret because they haven't had this kind of tight end in a very long time. It's been Tyler Conklin,
Yeah.
starting for them for a minute here, and it's just a clear hole for them. And I think that there is no doubt that Tyler Warren is going to be one of the best tight ends in football. So might as well just take him right here and continue to build up this offense and have
And
some fun.
and the fun part is, this offense has just been in such disarray for such a long time. The versatility that Warren can bring is not only a tight end, but a slot receiver, an outside threat. They put him in the backfield. He threw the ball a couple times over at Penn State.
Yep.
His offensive versatility is just going to overall make this offense so much better. But moving from the Jets to the Panthers, for the longest time, I was of the opinion they need to draft defensive line, more specifically edge rusher, or it's a bust at pick 8. So far, I've kind of transitioned that from they need to draft defensive line to just they need to draft the best defensive player available. And the best defensive player available to me by a wide margin is Will Johnson, the corner out of Michigan. I've said for a very long time, since before the college football season, that he is a top 3 blue chip player in this draft. I think he is one of the better corners I've ever scouted. I don't really get the concern some people have with him. I don't see it. Maybe it is the injuries, but I'm willing to take a chance on that of pairing a player like J.C. Horn, who they just made the highest paid cornerback in NFL history, with a player like Will Johnson. To lock down boundary corners is going to make not only this defense's as a whole job easier, but the defensive line jobs easier as well. If receivers aren't getting open, that ball's not getting out, and you're going to get some sacks. So I really love the fit of Will Johnson to this Panthers team.
Yeah, and I think, from the Panthers at 8 to the Saints at 9, a lot of people would probably expect Tet McMillan to
Hmm.
go off the board. And I think it would make a lot of sense for the Saints to take him just because, knowing Kellen Moore, he centered his offense a lot of times around featuring these ultra productive receivers, from CD to Keenan Allen in 2023 to A.J. Brown in Philadelphia. But I think when you look at the Saints, man, their offensive line is still in pretty bad shape. You
Hmm.
got Nick Saldiveri slated to start at left guard, Eric Cesar Ruiz still at right guard. You've still got the horrible Trevor Penning experiment at right tackle. And I think at a certain point, the Saints are going to say, if we want this offense to work moving forward, we got to say enough is enough and move on from Trevor Penning. And luckily, there's a very good prospect and a natural right tackle on the board in Armand Membu out of Missouri. And I think that from his combine to just his tape at Missouri, he's a versatile piece that they could use to fill a number of holes. But I think specifically at right tackle, it would just make a ton of sense for the Saints to scoop him up and, hope that the rest of their offense can fall into place from there.
Right, and I think the success of the Eagles is going to put in a lot of teams' minds like build from the trenches first, and that's
Yes.
what the Saints are going to be doing here. And you brought up his versatility, which is kind of the main part, which I love about this fit for Membao is I'm sure he's going to be fine at right tackle, but he's a slot and play guard too. He can be used to fill any hole they need on that offensive line with multiple holes. I love that fit. But talking about a team that's filled a lot of holes on their offensive line now, the Chicago Bears, I think they have the luxury of making a pick like Ashton Jeanty. And that's good. I think all signs are pointing to right now. I wouldn't put D line out of the question as well, maybe another edge rusher, but I like their signing of Deo Arayingbo. Either way, you think about who loves running backs, and you think about Ben Johnson and that offense who selected Jameer Gibbs with the 12th overall pick. I think we can both agree Ashton Jeanty is a better overall running back prospect than Jameer Gibbs was. And Jeanty
Yes.
behind this offensive line to help their young quarterback and Caleb Williams with a great run game. We know Ben Johnson wants to run the ball. there's not a whole lot of other analysis other than that. Ben Johnson, love run football, very good running back, loves running backs. They pick Ashton J&T after rebuilding their offensive line.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. And I think for the 49ers, get themselves into an interesting spot here because I think Memba would have been the seamless pick for
Hmm.
them. And just a home run for him to fall into their hands. But that's not how it goes in this scenario. And I think they'd still have the opportunity though to get a perfect fit in Gray Zabel out of North Dakota State, a
Hmm.
very versatile prospect, a guy who can really move, a guy who could really work in that Kyle Shanahan zone run game. And, the 49ers are just a little depleted on the offensive line. They've been cutting costs everywhere. They just lost Aaron Banks to the Packers in free agency. So I think that taking Zabel and finding a place for him alongside Pooney and Trent Williams is not a bad route to take.
Yes, and I think I'm sure some people will see this pick and say, Gray Zabel, what are you talking about? Gray Zabel is
Yep.
one of the most underrated players in this draft, in my opinion. By far the best interior lineman, other than maybe Will Campbell if you mock him there. But even then, Zabel is just fantastic Senior Bowl, fantastic combine. The tape is there, positional versatility out the wazoo. He can't really play. If he needed to play tackle, I'm sure he could, but with those 32-inch arms, it's just not a sustainable spot for him. But guard, he got some reps at center at the Senior Bowl. He can fill in this offensive line in a scheme that is so dependent on having a good offensive line and a player like Zabel. So I love that fit for them. But now moving to the Cowboys, there's for the longest time, and I still think it's possible that they draft interior because of their, Zach Martin leaving, drafting that guard early on. But with a player like Tedero McMillan on the board, this team needing another complement outside of CD Lamb in that receiving game, in that passing game for Dak Prescott, I really love this fit for them because CeeDee Lamb can be, well, CeeDee Lamb's everything. Run after catch, slot, deep down the field, deep threat. I see Tet's role as a really high end wide receiver too. A guy who's great at possession catching. He's a great route runner for his size. Not the greatest separator in the world, but that's okay when you've got a guy like CeeDee Lamb taking all that attention away from you and probably getting the team's top corner. So I love Tet as a complementary fit in this Cowboys offense to hopefully get it back on track with their new coach.
Yeah, and then, that leads to our Dolphins at number
Mm-hmm.
13. I think that you and me were probably thinking, offensive line, no matter what. But I think that with Membao and Zabel off the board,
Yeah.
just the two perfect fits for Miami, I think that it's okay to look elsewhere at that point. And I think the seamless fit here would be to scoop up Malachi Starks with Javon Holland going to the Giants in free agency and the safety room looking a little bit bleak right now. I think that Starks, despite the relative athletic score not being amazing at the combine. We know who he is. We know that he's just an amazing, versatile defensive back in coverage. He has awesome ball skills. He's super fluid. He's going to be that high level center fielder for Miami, or maybe even you play him towards the box and have him cover some of those slot guys. But no matter what, I think that he's going to make the defense a lot better under Anthony Weaver, and it's a big hole to fill.
And you know what? As much as I've screamed draft offensive line in the first round for feels like 5 years now, but I would not be mad at all with the pick of Starks because
No.
very much reminds me of Brian Branch, also coming out was viewed as this, he's not that athletic of a safety. And then he enters the league and he's one of the best nickel corners slash safeties immediately because that's what he showed on tape. And that's what Starks shows on tape too. Bringing up like he can play that nickel high safety role, kind of like how Anthony Weaver did with Kyle Hamilton when he was over with the Ravens. I think that's something. Now, Kyle Hamilton's a unicorn of his own, not comparing the two, but I do think having that X factor at safety is going to help this Dolphins defense a ton. But now moving to the Indianapolis Colts, this one's super cut and dry for me. I think they need to. I think tight end is one of their biggest needs, and I think taking somebody like Colston Loveland would be a huge boon for this offense. Now, funny story, most people have Tyler Warren as their tight end one. He's my tight end two, not by a lot, but Colston Loveland is my personal tight end one. And it's mainly just what play style do you want. Warren is much more of that Gronk, big, huge tight end, great after the catch, great blocker. Colson Loveland is more in that Travis Kelce, Brock Bowers esque receiving tight end roles. And I'm not saying he's going to be Kelce or Brock Bowers, but I think having that big slot receiver tight end who can play on the outside, play in line in this offense with Richardson, with Shane Steichen, I think it's a perfect fit. And I think him and Anthony Richardson, or maybe Indiana Jones, if Richardson doesn't work out, will slowly become slowly become best friends in this passing attack.
Yeah, no, that's a big time need to fill for them. And I think that the Atlanta Falcons have as big of a need as anyone with their pass rush coming off the edge. They signed Leonard Floyd in free agency, but that's not going to move the needle for me. That doesn't do enough for a team that had one of the worst pass rushes in football last year, despite having a very complete offense. And that was their downfall at times. So I think they need to go into this draft and just take the best pass rusher on the board. And I think that despite the character concerns coming out with him, I think that James Pierce Jr. should be their guy,
Mm-hmm.
considering what he did against that elite competition in the SEC, how high his win rate was, how high his amount of pressures was. Like, he was just getting after it. And I think that if you draft him, you feel good no matter how the results go, that you did your best to address that need of the pass rush off the edge.
And I think that's it's good to specify for the pass rush. I'm not the biggest James Pierce
Yes.
fan in the world. He comes in the league being a minus run defender. He has a lot of work he needs to do and put on weight and all that stuff. But this Falcons team isn't drafting him to care about the run really at all, to put it plainly. They'd be drafting
Yes.
him for third down when they need to get after the quarterback. James Pierce can do that, and I like that fit. Now going to the Cardinals. And for me, it comes down to keep improving on this defensive line. They got Josh Sweat in free agency, which is huge. Also, Dalvin Tomlinson. Suddenly, this is looking like one of the more improved units in football, and that's what they're going to be next year. But keep improving on it. Don't stop. Keep building in the trenches. And for me, that comes from edge rusher Michael Williams. Now, Williams, I do think, is a bit of a project. He's in that same mold of Walker where he's this huge individual, 6'5, 260, long arms, great athlete, and comes in as just an A-plus run defender. He still needs some development as a pass rusher, but this Cardinals team was just so bad at defending the run last year. Now you've got Sweat to help. Tomlinson, of course, is going to help, and Michael Williams. That's going to be a huge deal for this defense.
Absolutely. And if we talk about another team that kind of needs to find a way to transform their defense a bit, it's the Cincinnati Bengals. And, I'm not going to go on a huge tangent about how I just think it's ridiculous that they're prioritizing T. Higgins over Trey Hendrickson at this moment in time. But, it seems like they're going to pay their two receivers $70 million, which just does not need to be the way it is in this current climate and how easy it is to draft receivers. But okay, I'll just put all that aside and say, for the Bengals right now at pick 17, I don't think there's a bigger need for them than that interior defensive line. They lost Sheldon Rankins. It hasn't been the same since they lost DJ Reader a year ago. And I think that if you're going to try and fill that hole, you might as well take a guy like Kenneth Grant out of Michigan, who can really just kind of stonewall the interior offense for other teams. And hopefully you work towards, hitting on some more draft picks moving forward defensively, because they just are not investing their money there in their cap space. So Kenneth Grant.
And I think that would be best case scenario for this Bengals team. I think Kenneth Grant is deserving personally of a top 10 pick. So the fact that they're able to get a player of his caliber here at 17 to address a need like that is awesome. But now going to the Seahawks, in every one of my other mock drafts, I've had them taking Jahad Campbell because I just adore that fit in that defense. However, having this new offense that just added Cooper Kupp, you got rid of Metcalf, you got rid of Geno, you've now put Sam Darnold in. There's some intriguing pieces, but none of those pieces are gonna work in specifically this Shanahan style offense under Clint Kubiak if your offensive line doesn't improve, because it is in debate for the worst in football right now, specifically on the interior. So I think you need to attack the interior offensive line. And while he's listed as a tackle, and there's a world where I'm sure teams view him more as a tackle, I think Kelvin Banks has a very bright future playing guard. So that's where I'm going to go. It's as simple as this is the worst interior offensive line in football. They desperately need to address it. I think Kelvin Banks helps with that, especially with guys like Membao, Campbell, and Zabel off the board.
Yeah, and I think just as much as Banks can come in and help the Seahawks there, the Seahawks are probably going to help him a bit. We know how this Shanahan offensive scheme, puts a little less pressure on the offensive line to hold up in pass protection because
Yes.
they get the ball out quick. And I think that could be helpful to make a rookie like Kelvin Banks comfortable in that offense. And, he can do his work in the run game. So, yeah, I really like that fit for both sides. And, with the Buccaneers at number 19, the Buccaneers are looking pretty dang good offensively. They re-signed all their key pieces, Chris Godwin, Ben Bredesen, and, it looks like they're going to be covered there. But on defense, it's still a little bit shaky. That was their problem last year. And even though they brought back Levante David on a 1-year deal, it's really time for them to start thinking about the future of that linebacker position and really just who they're going to be playing alongside Levante David this year. And, luckily for them, they have multiple good options in this draft, especially in a Todd Bowles defense that likes to blitz their linebackers at times and get creative with those guys as pass rushers. You've got, and I think that they would go maybe with Jahad Campbell out of Alabama because Jahad Campbell is just an amazing athlete. He's a guy who was an edge rusher back in high school. And I just think that you could really get creative with him. And especially for Todd Bowles, he would be a very useful blitzer. And, maybe he shows some coverage chops early on. But regardless, getting mentored under Levante David, I think that pick could be a big success for them.
Yeah, and real quick, for those who don't know, he not only was an edge rusher in high school, he was the number one edge rusher in the country in high school.
Yeah.
He just happened to go to Bama, which had a loaded room, and they moved him to off ball, where in this defense, you're right, he can do a bit of everything. Think Devin White was an excellent blitzer in this defense. And I
Yes.
think
Yes.
Jahad Campbell's got even more juice because of his size, because of his athleticism. I'm excited to see. I would be super excited to see that. But now moving to the Broncos, who maybe the offseason winners so far on how they've addressed free
Yeah.
agency with Dre Greenlaw, Talanoa Hufanga, Evan Ingram, who's a fantastic fit in Sean Payton's offense as that big slot receiving tight end. Why not keep improving upon this offense? Right now, still, it's only two weapons. It's Cortland Sutton. Well, Marvin Mims, of course, too, is this deep threat, but it's Cortland Sutton, Evan Ingram, Marvin Mims. I think there's another piece that you could fit into that puzzle, and that another piece I think comes in Emeka Egbuka, who coming out he can play. I think he can play in the slot for them a lot as sort of that Michael Thomas quick slant role, but unlike a guy maybe like JSN who played a lot of slot for this Ohio State team too, I think Egbuka, I should say, has a lot more juice and has that upside as an outside receiver, as a wire and X. So slotting him into this offense for that young quarterback and Bo Nix, I think there's a chance that this Broncos offense is really, really good next year. And I don't think it's a stretch to say that they're that far off from this current Chiefs team.
No, I completely agree there. I think that might be my low key take of the offseason as of right now, as the Chiefs look a little bit shaky themselves. And, the Broncos almost beat them last year in Kansas City, and they just continue to bolster that offense. I mean, they're headed in a great direction for sure. A team where I'm not so sort of understanding of their direction is the Pittsburgh Steelers. And that kind of just seems to be the way they always are. You don't necessarily know what exactly their plan is. It seems like their plan is just to compete at all times. And, they get DK Metcalf in the trade market. It seems like they're probably going to fill that quarterback hole in free agency. It seems like they're going to go young on the offensive line, give Troy Fautanu a shot, Mason McCormick. So I'm going to just focus on the defense here and think about the guy that could help their defense the most right now. And I think that that would probably be Jahdae Barron out of Texas, the Thorpe Award winner. He's an older defensive back, but he was the best in college football last year. And the Steelers have that hole at nickelback. They have Brandon Eccles and Beanie Bishop out there who made some nice plays for them last year. But I think that's not going to stop you from taking a guy like Jahdae Barron to really help your coverage unit. And, the Steelers defense once again just looks really, really tough when they can combine their amazing defensive line with another stud defensive back who can also really play the run as well. It just fits their identity, I think.
And I think fitting their identity is a perfect thing to say. Jahdae Barron is he plays like a Steeler. This is such a physical defensive back. Loves contact. I think that's a great fit. But now moving to this Chargers team, who I know they just added Mekhi Becton, who I think is a fantastic fit in this Chargers offense. But we know how bad this team wants to run the football, and you can only do that when you have a great offensive line in front of you with stout offensive linemen. And when I think of stout offensive linemen, I think of Tyler Booker. And I still think this interior offensive line is in need of some improvement, even with the Mekhi Becton signing. Tyler Booker is the pick for these guys. Najee Harris running behind just massive individuals. Bradley Bozeman, Joe Alt, Tyler Booker, Mekhi Becton, and Rashawn Slater. That gets you excited if you're a Chargers fan.
Absolutely. That's just an awesome fit. Getting really big up front. Not necessarily the craziest athletes, but they're going to be physical in the run game, and that's another anchor for Justin Herbert. And I think that for the Packers at 23, um, their pass rush stands out to me as the thing that needs to be changed the most, and they have not addressed that in free agency. But I would say their cornerbacks are not amazing either, and they did go out and get Nate Hobbs, but I assume they're going to play him in the slot. And, they still have that hole at outside corner, especially when it comes to Jair Alexander. He may not actually get traded this offseason, but I think that's still something you're going to be looking to address. And I figure if you're the Packers and you want to continue to make playoff runs, why not take a chance on the guy that I probably trust the most of anyone to come in and be a stud outside corner who can really man up against some of the better receivers in the game, and Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame. He had that injury that made him miss most of the season, but when you look at the tape, he is just as stout as anyone. And I think for the Packers, it might be a risk worth taking just because of how much he could help them right away. And it could really be a steal at this point if he's able to stay healthy.
And that's the thing too. If he had played a full season this year, I don't think there's a shot he makes it out of the top 20
Oh,
without a
no
doubt.
chance.
His tape from last season specifically, if you haven't watched him play against Marvin Harrison Jr. last year against Ohio State, it's some of the best tape you'll find of any corner in this draft. Just fantastic. And if he can stay healthy, this is suddenly, especially if they don't trade Jair, this corner room of Jair Alexander, Nate Hobbs in the slot and the nickel back, and Ben Morrison, that is beautiful, beautiful football. But they're not the only team in the NFC North who is in need of some DB help. And I know this is going to be kind of a stretch of a pick. There are, I think, some better corners available. However, Azarie Thomas fits this Brian Flores defense like a glove. I kind of compare him a bit to Xavier Howard, just this big, physical press man cover corner. And this is going to allow Brian Flores to go back to a bit more of that cover zero style of defense that he was running in Miami. Now with the Vikings, it's been a great defense still, but he's had to run a lot more zone because he hasn't had the DBs to hold up on islands. Azarie Thomas can play press man coverage. That is what he's best at. He's actually not all that great at zone just yet. But adding that into the room, allowing Flores to go back to his roots, I think would be a big deal for the Vikings defense.
Absolutely. That's a very fun fit. I really like the run we're on, and I think that we can continue that with the Houston Texans. I don't know how you feel about what they've done with the offensive line, and I know that Texans fans kind of feel like trading Laramie Tunsil was an okay move as sort of this cultural reset, not having to worry about those false starts. But at the end of the day, they just got rid of their most stout pass protector for CJ Stroud by a mile. And they have not really filled those holes with veterans in free agency, despite trading for a couple depth pieces at guard. Lincoln Tomlinson and Ed Ingram have been very problematic for their past quarterbacks themselves. So I think they have to emphasize offensive line early on in the draft. And what better guy to do that with at 25 than Donovan Jackson out of Ohio State? Because Donovan Jackson was playing for CJ Stroud back at Ohio
Yep.
State a couple years back, and he has that experience at guard. He showed some great stuff at tackle during their college football playoff run. It just makes a ton of sense, and he's the hometown guy. I just think that you can really trust him to be one of the more comfortable guys right away, just because of how much he's accomplished at Ohio State, and bring reuniting him with CJ Stroud. I think that's a clear way to help him moving forward.
And whether it's at tackle or guard, because he can play both, he played both in college. They need everything. This offensive line is bad. So adding Donovan Jackson, I'm sure is going to make CJ Stroud happier than he is right now. But now moving to this Rams team, and I think DB is 100% in play here with this pick. However, I think this team is another need this team has is off-ball linebacker. And I don't know if he falls this far in an actual draft, but Jalen Walker being here at 26, I think is perfect because I know he plays a bit of both edge and off ball. I like him more as an off ball linebacker, extremely athletic, extremely physical, has a nose for the football. And another thing he can do for you is add even more pressure along with this insane defensive line they have up front as a blitzer because he is so good coming off the edge. He is so good blitzing over guards from the off ball linebacker position. This Rams defense has put an emphasis on just making this defense and front seven as good as possible. Jalen Walker is going to help them do that.
Absolutely. That's a very fun fit. And, I've got another fun fit for you with the Ravens at 27. They were able to keep Ronnie Stanley, and they still probably have some more work to do on the offensive line. But I just can't help but imagine the idea, even though they just signed DeAndre Hopkins, I can't help but imagine how fun it would be if they took Matthew Golden here, because Matthew Golden would be able to play outside receiver for them, and he would continue to be another dynamic threat, another good route runner, another explosive play threat, but also just being the guy that could really have the best hands in that room for Lamar Jackson. And we've seen so often how the Ravens fall short just because they have guys who cannot hold on to the ball come playoff time. And having Matthew Golden as an outside guy with Bateman and Hopkins, you can move Zay Flowers inside a little bit more often, let him be the true dynamic slot threat that he is. I think it makes sense for everyone. I think that Matthew Golden would elevate their offense in a lot of ways, and it just would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, there's a world where year one, Golden, Flowers, Bateman, and Hopkins is one of the, if not the best receiving core in football. That's very, very fun. But now going to the Lions, who they're a very complete team. I think interior offensive line is an option here, but I don't know if there is one I would take in the first round at this point with so many off the board. What we are going to do though is take an edge rusher opposite of Aiden Hutchinson, and to me, the one that I think fits that Dan Campbell knee biter physical player sort of role is Shamar Stewart out of Texas A&M. They were in the Myles Garrett sweepstakes. They now have Myles Garrett at home, very from Texas A&M. Very similar physicals at the combine, just about 30 career sacks in college off as productive players. Shamar Stewart has a bit of a ways to go when it comes to developing as a pass rusher, but the pressures are there, and he comes out of the box as an A-plus run defender. Plus, having this great defensive line of Aleem McNeil, of Aiden Hutchinson on the other side, that's going to put Stewart in favorable positions rushing off the edge on the other side as well. All of that pressure is just going to make his job easier. And now that defensive line of Stewart, Reeder, McNeil, Hutchinson, as just even a run defense, that's gross. It was already gross last year. It's grosser this year.
Yeah, yeah. You talk about strengthening a strength, they would absolutely do that. I think Stewart falling that far would be a bit of correction, I think, to the people that think he shouldn't be a top 10 pick. Well, I don't think that he should fall out of the top
Mm-hmm.
20 really with his traits.
Mm-hmm.
And thinking about another team that could strengthen their strengths, the Commanders had me thinking with that Laramie Tunsil trade. I thought that was very interesting on their end just because it felt like the offense was in much better shape than the defense going into this offseason, but they still decided why not get some more star power and really be good at left tackle despite Brandon Coleman looking promising as a rookie. And I was thinking, they could just take an edge rusher here. Just imagine how deadly it would be if they took Omarion Hampton out of North
Oof.
Carolina because their running backs are fine, Eckler and Robinson, but just imagine how much Omarion Hampton could do in the backfield as a duo, rushing duo with Jaden Daniels on some of those read options, what he could do in the receiving game. He's just an amazing all around back. And I think that the Commanders would be getting themselves yet another star in that offense to support Jaden Daniels. And, they can be in number one offense contention next year with him. I truly believe that.
Yes, they can absolutely be in that number one offense contention because if they were to add O'Mara and Hampton, there's no doubt this is the toughest team to tackle in open space in the league. Jaden Daniels, their
Yep.
quarterback, the guy throwing the ball, is one of the tougher players to tackle in open space. But now you've added Debo, who's in that same boat, Hampton, who's in that same boat, McLaurin does that on his own as well. That's just a super exciting offense and Cliff Kingsbury's so good at getting his star players the ball in space. So I that would be such an exciting fit.
Oh,
It
yeah.
would be amazing. But now going to the Bills. I'm sorry to Bills fans because I've made the same pick in every mock draft I've done, even like the live streams, but it's just too perfect. Derek Harmon here, the defensive tackle out of Oregon. This Bills team, I think, come playoff time, their biggest weakness over the last couple of years is not having that big athletic, run stopping defensive tackle in the middle of their defense. And I think Derek Harmon fits that to a T with a lot of pass rushing upside as well. This Bills team overall is pretty complete. You could have gone a corner, you could have gone maybe another edge rusher or safety, but I think interior defensive, getting bigger and younger specifically on the interior defensive line should be the Bills' highest priority in this draft, and Derek Harmon does that immediately.
Absolutely. I think this defensive tackle class is pretty darn good.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of options for a lot of teams that could go from the mid to late first round. And I think the Chiefs could continue that because I think coming out of the Super Bowl, everyone thought, well, their offensive line has to be what they address. And I think they sort of went out and got their current solution at left tackle in Jalen Moore. They paid him a good bit. Seems like they're going to try and move Kingsley Sumataya inside to maybe replace Joe Thuney, and they keep Trey Smith around. So I'm not going to worry about the offensive line here, despite that being what I have personally been trying to mock them. And I'm looking at the defense, I'm looking at the whole on their interior defensive line alongside Chris Jones after Trayshawn Warren went to the Panthers. And I don't blame the Chiefs for not paying the price that he got from Carolina, but that is now a really big hole. And I think that this is a good opportunity for the Chiefs maybe to fill that hole and maybe even look to what life without Chris Jones will be by taking a chance on Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss. Just a tremendously talented player, a prospect that just flashes like crazy. A guy who had a great year at Ole Miss, a guy who you can now have come in and learn from Chris Jones and hopefully become their next star defensive piece that they find in the draft. That's kind of been what's held the Chiefs together lately without amazing offensive talent around Patrick Mahomes. And I think this is a great opportunity for the Chiefs to fit another guy in and develop him successfully.
And to add on to your point, when you think of the AFC West, look at where these offensive lines are coming from. In this draft alone, Will Campbell has been added to the Raiders. Tyler Booker has been added to the Chargers. They're teams who love to run the football, so you have to be
Yep.
explosive and stout in the middle of your defense. And Walter Nolan's going to absolutely help provide that. And I think him learning from a guy like Chris Jones is also an added benefit here as well. But now going to the Eagles, and this is the most complete team in football by a wide margin. They can just take the best player available, right? But knowing this Eagles team, when they do that, they tend to go in the trenches. And Lane Johnson is not going to be here forever, unfortunately. As much as us football fans wish he could be, he won't be there forever. And I think drafting Josh Simmons as a guy who will be the team's right tackle of the future, or whatever happens, tackle of the future. I mean, that would be one of the biggest steals in the draft for me personally. Off of tape alone, Josh Simmons is who I think the best offensive lineman in this draft. Unfortunately, he just had a really bad injury this season that's going to make him drop far. It always happens. There's always that great player. That Ben Morrison in the same boat. He's probably a top 15 pick if it wasn't for the injury. But Simmons not having to rush back, nursing up the injury, learning behind Lane Johnson, and then filling in when the time comes would be an amazing, amazing draft strategy for this Eagles team that's always focused on the trenches regardless of who they have. But that's it. That was our first round joint mock draft, and I'm looking at it right now. It's pretty good, if I have to say so myself.
Yeah, no, I think even though it was more on the predictive side, I think that you look a lot of these teams and you would really like the fits. So I think that there are a lot of interesting ideas that we've laid out here that even I wasn't really thinking about before free agency. So
And
yeah,
that's one of the cool parts about doing joint stuff is everybody has different opinions on not only draft prospects but team needs and team fits. So being able to collab and seeing these ideas that you maybe haven't thought of before is not only good for us as like draft analysts, but just good for everybody who watches these mock drafts who get bored of the same old mindset every time, you know?
absolutely. Yeah, no.
And yeah, but that'll be it. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please feel free to leave a like and comment and subscribe. I plan to be doing more joint mock drafts in the future. Nico, I thank you so much for coming on and being here for this joint mock draft.
Absolutely. It was a great time. Yeah.
All right, we will talk to you guys later.